Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tribal Home NOFA workshop for home projects and first-time home buyer. It's 1:01 p.m. We're going to wait until about 1:05 to allow for people to enter and get settled, and then we will commence. Welcome, everybody, for those who just joined, to the Tribal Home NOFA workshop for projects and first-time home buyer. We're going to wait until about 1:05, and then we'll get started. Welcome, everyone, to today's Tribal Home NOFA workshop for projects and first-time home buyer. We're going to wait a couple of more minutes to see if any other people are going to join us, and then we'll get started. Welcome, everybody, to today's Tribal Home NOFA workshop for projects and first-time home buyer. We're going to wait one more minute, and then we're going to get started. And I will let everybody know on the call. It looks like we've got a fairly small group today, so that should make for some good questions and answers. Our illustrious leader, our section chief, Nikki McKay, for those of you who know her, is not in attendance today. So we will be filling in her absence. And if any questions come up or if anything is not clear, please don't hesitate to use either the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen or the chat function. And it looks like we've got one item in the chat already about Nikki, but feel free to put other questions in the chat or in the Q&A. And I will ask if other folks on the call who are in present mode, if you can keep an eye on the Q&A. And at the end of each section, we'll address each of those before moving on. So with that said, why don't we go ahead and get started? So again, welcome everybody. This is the last time you're going to have to hear me say this, I promise, to today's Home NOFA presentation for tribal and projects and first-time home buyer. And let's move on to introductions, please. Before we get started and introduce the rest of the team that you see here, we are going to have a few words from Mary Lindeblad Fry, Colville, Senior Tribal Affairs Specialist and Tribal Liaison, as well as Zachary Ferguson, Tribal Affairs Specialist.
Thank you so much, Francesca. Hi, my name is Mary Lindeblad Fry. I'm the Tribal Liaison with the Tribal Affairs team here at HCD. Thank you for being here, and thank you to the home team for putting together this webinar. And just want to reiterate what Francesca said. Please don't be shy about asking questions. Raise your hand or put them in the chat box, because I will be monitoring that chat box as well. And also, I believe the slides and the recording will be posted soon afterwards. So if you miss anything, don't worry about it, because I believe that information will be up soon. And I will pass it along to Zach.
Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, Mary.
Oh, sorry, Zachary. I apologize.
No
Not next slide, please.
No worries. Thanks, Francesca, and thanks, Mary. And thanks to all of you who are here today and watching this later on. Really appreciate your attendance and your engagement. I just want to quickly kind of introduce the CAP program and kind of what it is that Mary and I do here at HCD. CAP is the California Indian Assistance Program, and it was kind of restarted by AB 1010 in 2019, which was a law that was passed here in California. And what AB 1010 did was really make tribes a priority in our HCD programs and make tribes and tribal housing entities eligible for HCD funding, and also establish this CAP program. And so what that means is we're the team responsible, Mary, myself, and a few others, for really coordinating across HCD, working with different departments to help program staff and help our programs to kind of take in tribal feedback and then evolve and adapt and modify those programs to be more accessible to tribes. In addition to that, and why we're here today, is we also help support our program staff in providing technical assistance to tribes and tribal applicants. And so we're excited to be here today to do that. We're excited to just be the start of kind of our journey with home, and providing TA and helping with that, and helping you all and other tribal applicants kind of understand and really try to make this program work. And so thanks for allowing us to be here today. We're excited to, again, support the home program staff, and are looking forward to the rest of the presentation. Thanks so much. I'll pass it back to you, Francesca.
Thank you very much, Zachary and Mary. And again, my apologies. Moving on. So the first thing that we're going to do is we want to take a quick poll for the audience that is in attendance. This is really just going to help us understand who is at the other end of our screen here today. A little bit about you, how long you've been doing what you're doing, your level of experience, knowledge, etc. So if we can just take a couple minutes to complete this poll, I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much. We'll give you about a minute or two. Thank you. I see some responses coming in. This will really help us to kind of tailor our presentation based upon your roles, based upon your level of experience, etc. Looks like just a couple of people so far have answered. If we can get a few more responses, we'd be very, very grateful.
Francesca, I think we can move on from the poll.
Okay, why don't we close the poll? Thank you, Soledad. Okay. So it looks like we've got some developers here, less than 1 year, so a newer audience, but kind of evenly split between 1 to 3 years and 5 to 10 years of experience. Thank you very much. Now let's move ahead with our presentation. So we've already said that if you have any questions during the presentation, please put them in the Q&A and that will be monitored. After the presentation, please make sure that any and all questions go directly to the home NOFA at hcd.ca.gov mailbox. Please do not email individual reps or anyone else in the home program. Please send them to the home NOFA mailbox. That enables us to answer questions accurately, correctly, and consistently to everybody who has questions. Next slide, please. As far as the home project team who will be presenting to you today, I already unfortunately gave our apologies for Nicolay McKay, our section chief, unable to join us today. I am home program HCD Rep 2, Francesca Wander. And with us in the meeting here today are also JT Marcel, also Rep 2, as well as Chris Janillo, another HCD Home Rep 2, as well as Soledad Sandoval, HCD Home Rep 2. And then, unfortunately, Stephanie Booth, one of our other colleagues, is not with us today, but we do have one of our illustrious retired annuitants, Albert Rowland, on the call, as well as the home program manager, Jay Cortez. Bob Rustad, who is another retired annuitant, is busy sailing around the oceans off of Argentina. So he's not with us today either, but he is here with us in spirit. Next slide, please. As far as the application submittal period and deadlines, the eCivis portal, with which you may be familiar from last NOFA, will be opened promptly on February 12th, 2024 at 8 o'clock in the morning Pacific time. And you will have through to and including May 9th, 2024, up until 5 p.m. Pacific time. And please bear in mind and make sure to submit your application and all the supporting documentation required early. Better sooner than later. Certainly don't leave it to the last minute. What we want to avoid is anybody submitting a piece of documentation or a part of their application at 5:01 in the afternoon on the 9th, because we will not be able to submit that application. So please plan ahead, make sure you submit everything that you'll need to apply well before the 5 p.m. deadline on May 9th. Next slide, please. As far as what we're going to be taking you through today, and we've set aside 4 hours for this, but we will likely complete everything that we need to within a couple of hours, including answering any questions that you may raise during the presentation. We're going to be covering essentially what is in the NOFA and particularly what is new from this year, from between last NOFA versus this year. So we'll be going into a little bit of new information about the eCivis application portal, the funding that will be available to you folks for application, the new application limits. JT Marcel will then go over changes to threshold requirements. Soledad Sandoval and Chris Janillo will take you through rating and ranking. And then you get to come back around to me again, and I'll take you through project feasibility, which will include financial feasibility, as well as NEPA, as well as relocation. Next slide, please. The eCivis application portal. Again, home applications must be accessed beginning February 12th, 2024 through the eCivis Grants Network portal, as you did last time. And the program is available for solicitation page and you've got the URL both on this screen, but it is also in the NOFA. So make sure you look through your NOFA, make sure you look through your supplement, because there are numerous important links contained therein that will direct you to where you need to go to apply, and that will direct you to all of the regulations that you will need to be familiar with throughout the application process. Next slide, please. NOFA overview funding availability. There will be approximately $120 million available in total, 55% or about 66 million for rental projects, 5% or about 6 million for first-time homebuyer projects, 40% or 48 million approximately for program activity. 50% will be reserved for rural areas, so a total of about 60 million. About 15%, well, 15%, not about, or 18 million will be reserved specifically for CHODOs. 18 million will be targeted for federally declared disaster areas. And 20% or 24 million in total will be dedicated toward Native American entities. Next slide, please. New this year is recovery assistance for natural disaster survivors, as well as some updated state objectives, including extremely low income households. And there will be more on all of this as we proceed throughout the presentation. Next slide, please. New this year. In 2022-2023, the funding limits by project activity have gone up from the 2020-2021 NOFA, wherein in 2020-2021, the funding max was $7 million per project. Now it's been raised to $12 million per project, not including administrative, ADC, which was activity delivery, which has now been renamed project-related soft costs, or CHODO ops. First-time homebuyer is at $3 million. So essentially, there's now another $5 million max available for each project if you qualify for that full amount. As far as administrative funds, those have also changed. In the last NOFA, the state recipient administrative admin cap was $150,000. This NOFA, there is $125,000 administrative funds for projects applying for $6 million or more, but $75,000 in administrative funds for projects applying for less than $6 million. So that amount has gone down by a little bit. However, there's now also, instead of activity delivery costs, which used to be in the old NOFA at $50,000, that is now called project-related soft costs, and it is now at $75,000. So that's gone up a bit. And we've only changed that name from activity delivery or ADC to project-related soft costs merely to be consistent with the nomenclature that HUD uses. HUD uses the verbiage project-related soft costs, so we've just changed the name accordingly. So we've gone from 150 on admin to 125 or 75, depending upon your grant amount, and for project-related soft costs, that's been an increase to $75K. Next slide, please. We've already discussed the fact that ADC or activity delivery cost is now being referred to project-related soft cost, whereas in the prior NOFA, the minimum funds for a project was $1,000 per unit. Now it's $5,000. And in the previous NOFA, deep targeting was available. Deep targeting is no longer allowed. Next slide, please. Some NOFA overview definitions. To meet the definition of an eligible jurisdiction, applicants must meet the following criteria. You must be proposing a project or program that will be located or carried out in your defined service area. Generally, this will be within the applicant's city limits, a county's unincorporated area, or an Indian reservation, rancheria, or service area of tribally designated housing agency. Next slide, please.
Francesca, there's one quick question in the Q&A. we can answer it now.
Sure, why not?
They are requesting a copy of the slides or asking if we will have a copy of the slides. And I just wanted to say, yes, we absolutely will have a copy of the slides available to you all.
That is correct. Anything else in Q&A or chat?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And considering the fact that you will be receiving a copy of the slides, I am not here to read the slides to you that you will be able to read for yourself. So this slide here contains a lot of verbiage, a lot of legalese. It comes directly from the NOFA that you should become intimately familiar with along with the supplement. So I'm going to proceed through the next few slides fairly quickly, unless Mary or Zachary object or wish to add anything specifically to them. I will just reference the definition of Native American entity does appear in your NOFA, so please become very familiar with it. And then we can move to the next slide. NOFA overview definitions, Native American entity, federally recognized tribe. Again, we differentiate between federally recognized and state. So federally recognized means, I'll let you go back just because that was a little bit quicker. Means any tribal government, which is a federally recognized tribe and includes a duly constituted governing body of an Indian reservation or rancheria. Next slide, please. This again is now a non-federally recognized tribe, which again will appear in your NOFA. So make sure that you are familiar with both definitions. Next slide, please. And then here is some information on Native American lands. I will take you through this just because it is significant. It's any real property located within the state of California meeting the following criteria: trust land for which the U.S. holds title to the tract or interest in trust for the benefit of one or more tribes, or is restricted Indian land for which one or more tribes or individual Indians hold fee title to the tract or interest, or lands outside the jurisdiction of tribal government owned or co-owned by Native American entity in accordance with 25 CCR 8201. And again, please refer to your NOFA for all of this information. Next slide, please. Marked on NOFA overview definitions, an NAE service area means the area where the project is located within the native land and includes lands outside of the NAE tribal government jurisdiction up to 100 miles from the boundary of the trust or restricted land as defined. That is within non-entitlement jurisdictions. Next slide, please. Native American applicants would be either, as per the definitions we just raced through, Native American entity federally recognized, as well as Native American entity non-federally recognized tribes, may apply as either state recipients or developers. NAE NFRT may only apply as a special purpose entity developer for home funds for project activities by forming a special purpose entity, which means the legal entity or combination of legal entities with continuing control of the home project, conforming with requirements of 25 CCR 83.13.2. And again, all of this is in the NOFA. Next slide, please. Eligible applicants, state recipients, which could be either a local agency or a local public entity defined as a Native American entity located within state home eligible jurisdictions per NOFA Appendix A, or developers may include federally recognized NAEs as well. Next slide, please. AB 1010. You may be familiar with this. It's a process that enables tribes to request to waive or to modify state program requirements. AB 1010, however, cannot apply to state or federal statute or to federal regulations, but it can be considered for state or program regulations. So that's a very important distinction. There are certain things that AB 1010 can be used to waive, but there are other things that it cannot be used to waive. For assistance or support in submitting an AB 1010 waiver, please contact the program team and the California Indian Assistance Program at ciap@hcd.ca.gov. And I believe that is what Zachary is doing here, as it looks like he's grinning to us all. And he's giving us a thumbs up. So he's your guy for AB 1010 questions. But actually, the Home NOFA mailbox is your guy for any NOFA questions. Next slide, please. Home eligible projects could be either rental new construction projects or rental rehab projects with or without acquisition. They can be either state recipients or developers, as long as the project is located within the applicant's service area. And they can be first-time homebuyer projects. With state recipients, the project must be located within the applicant's service area. Next slide, please. More on application limits. There can be only one home application pursuant to this NOFA for no more than 2 activities. Those activities consist of either one rental project and one first-time homebuyer project, or one rental project and any combination of program activities, or one first-time homebuyer project and any combination of program activities except for the first-time homebuyer program activity. Next slide, please. NOFA overview, rental project limits. The rental new construction project limit we reviewed previously is now been raised from $6 million. It is, from $7 million in the last NOFA to up to $12 million in this NOFA. We also mentioned earlier that deep affordability targeting is no longer available, which hopefully will not be an issue since our $12 million limit is now so high. Rental rehab with or without acquisition is also $12 million. With regard to rental rehab specifically, the funds are provided to rehabilitate a specific rental project on a specific site by a specific developer with or without acquisition. Next slide, please. In regard to administrative and now project-related soft cost, formerly activity delivery, and CHOTO operation funds limits. As we mentioned earlier, the state recipient administrative funds max, which used to be $150 across the board, is now $125,000 in admin funds for projects that are applying for $6 million or more in home funds, or $75,000 in admin funds for projects that are applying for less than $6 million. Plus, they're also eligible for $75,000 in project-related soft costs, which is an increase from last NOFA's $50,000 of activity delivery funds. Next slide, please. At this point, I am thankfully going to be turning it over to JT Marcel, and he will take you through threshold requirements. Go ahead, JT.
There's currently no questions in the Q&A or the chat, so we're good.
Thank you. JT, you're muted.
Thank you for that. And thank you for getting us started this afternoon, Francesca. I will be covering a little more in depth on topics that Francesca has already mentioned. I will also reiterate and really emphasize the fact that our applications need to be in by 5 p.m. on May 9th. eCivis will close the ability for folks to apply at that time. 5:01, you will not get it in. So we are stressing sooner than later.
JT. I'm
Yes.
sorry, JT. I'm going to interrupt you for did you say May 9th or April 9th?
It's May 9th.
May 9th. Okay. I just wanted to confirm
May 9th.
that.
Yeah, no, it's May 9th. But yeah, at 5:01, you won't be able to submit. So sooner than later is best. The eligible applicants are state recipients, Native American entities, and developers. Eligible project location must be located within a state home jurisdiction or on tribal lands. Next. Eligible activities: rental new construction and rental rehab. For rental new construction, it's for a specific multi-family project on a specific state, specific developer. For rental new construction, projects may be with or without acquisition. Rental rehabilitation projects, funds provided to rehabilitate a specific rental project with or without acquisition, property acquisition. No transitional housing is allowed. Next slide, please. Threshold factors. We have quite a few of these. Eligible activities. Oops, I just went to the wrong page there. Eligible activity: first-time homebuyer project. Construction financing must include the following: new construction to develop homes on specific sites. 100% of the home investment must roll over to permanent financing to eligible first-time homebuyers and must be sold to eligible homebuyers. Homebuyer mortgage assistance only, no home construction financing. In a project that is being constructed or acquired and rehabilitated with other funds to then be sold to eligible first-time homebuyers. Next, please. Applicant must include all applicants, market study, appraisal. Phase 1's, all applicants on new construction only. For rehab, those items previously mentioned, as well as physical needs assessment, lead-based paint and mold, and asbestos. Next, please. No pending litigation for the project can be outstanding. Single audit report filed with the Federal Clearinghouse and site control. Next. Here's where we get into land site control. I will direct you folks to the UMR, Uniform Multifamily Regulations, Section 8303. We touch on them briefly here, but they're more detailed there. Long-term ground lease must meet the requirements for federal to low-income families in accordance with CRF 24. Tribal trust land site control must be evidenced by a title status report or an attorney's opinion regarding chain of title and current title status. Next, please. There are 5 or 6 different ways for site control. It's through fee title, first one. Next one is leasehold, interest on subject property. 3, an enforceable option to purchase or lease. Disposition and development agreement, a DDA. An agreement with public agency with exclusive rights to negotiate. And finally, a sales land contract. For purchase agreement or a disposition and dispute agreement, a DDA, refer to HUD memo guidance on option and conditional contracts for purchase of real property for environmental reviews conducted by responsible entity. Next, please. There are 5 acceptable forms of site control to avoid choice limiting process or limiting problems. Please note, these are to avoid choice limiting. Site purchase or long-term lease must be consistent with the UMR requirements prior to submitting the home application. Option to purchase must be conditioned on the reasonable entity's determination to proceed with project based on the results of a subsequent environmental review and the receipt of an authority to use grant funds. The cost to secure site control document must be a normal portion of the principal price. Next, please. Purchase agreement, DDA, option to lease, or exclusive right to negotiate may not be conditioned upon NEPA clearance or any other federal requirement. A conditional purchase contract may be used for an existing single-family home units, 1 to 4 units, or an existing multifamily residential project. A leasehold interest on the project property must comply with all program requirements, including compliance with 25 CCR 8316. Next, please. Continuing on. For more information, please refer to HUD CPD notice and Assistant Secretary Mercedes Marquis memo. We've included a couple sites for you here to go and read up more on those. Next, please. I'm happy to now pass the torch on to Soledad Sandoval, who will be covering rating and ranking and scoring.
Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for attending. In the next section, we are going to be discussing the rating and ranking and reviewing each section or each item in more detail. And please do note that although this is a competitive NOFA, there is approximately $14 million in funds within this NOFA targeted exclusively for Native American entity projects. Thank you. Next slide, please. This is our scoring categories, and it is a summary of all the categories we will be discussing. We will dive a little deeper into each category and direct you where to find additional information as we discuss each one. Please note, and this is important to note, that not all categories may apply to you. So if that is the case and a certain category does not apply, you will then be awarded the full points that category is worth. Also note too, that the maximum point obtainable is 1,550, and that there is a minimum points score of 930 points that each application must score in order to meet the minimum requirements. Next slide, please. Okay, housing elements. This does not apply to Native American entities. They are exempt, so we will be awarding the full 50 points for this category. Next slide, please. Formula relocation points. That does not apply to Native American entities. They're not eligible for these points, so the points will be awarded. The rural area is applicable, and points will be awarded for projects proposed in a rural community, including tribal trust land. If the project is not located in a rural community, points will not be awarded. Next slide, please. Capacity. We will be covering capacity in their meaning in the next few slides. It's a total of 450 points, and there are several sub-factors or subcategories within this one main category that we will be discussing. And it may or may not apply to you. If you have ever applied for a home loan, a home project, it may apply, it would apply, but if not, then these will not apply. So the first is prior applicant experience. Applicant must demonstrate experience implementing local, state, or federal affordable housing and or community development projects. And we need to go back. Look back here is 7 years. So what we would be looking is for experience starting January 1st, 2017 and up to December 31st, 2023. So, and this will account too for any community development project. So if the applicant has experience on that, then we would be awarding points. Next slide, please. Okay. Again, capacity continued. Native American entities, their experience may include implementation of affordable housing and or community development activities under the HAZDAP program. So 10 points for each project completed, creating 4 more units of affordable housing, 10 points awarded for each project completed as defined in the home supplemental application. And I would just like to reiterate what Francesca said. Please read the NOFA. It has many more details on this. And you will be surprised at how many, you can be awarded points for. Of course, this category would be a maximum of 50 points. Next slide, please. Capacity continue. This goes to your prior development team experience. The development team needs to show project experience developing the same or similar type of subsidized project, All experience submitted will be reviewed and points awarded accordingly. So please do not think that you may not receive this, or that if you do not have a specific experience, please just apply, submit the application, and we will review every single item that you list. You can receive up to 200 points for this category. Prior performance. All applicant, this is a little bit different than what we how the rest of the application is scored, because all applicants start with 200 points. And from there, points are deducted if certain deadlines, certain reporting deadlines, and so forth are not met. So we will be discussing this in more detail, because we want to make sure that it is understood how crucial it is to meet all deadlines, all application reporting that we require, all material information, all monitoring, compliance, because once you're awarded, these must be met. And if going forward, you would be losing points, and we do not want that to happen. So next slide, please. So we will, I'm going to go back to this one. We will be discussing project reporting deadlines, applicant reporting, material misrepresentation, and monitoring non-compliance. Okay, next slide, please. Prior performance. Again, if you've not submitted a project with us and you have not been awarded a project, this will not apply to you. But if you have, please note that there is a point deduction, in the point deducted vary. If one of these, either permanent financing deadline is missed, project setup deadline, construction loan closing deadline, project completion deadline, or expenditure deadline. All of these deadlines have a date associated with them, and they will be delineated in your standard agreement. There's point reductions from 5 to 8 points depending on which one you miss, if you do miss one. So please be aware of that. Again, this may not apply if you have not been awarded home funds, but if you have, it may in the future for your next future application. Next slide, please. Applicant reporting. This is what we'd like to mention, because it is very easy to lose points in this. We require several reports to be completed. Your monthly status reports, your annual reports, quarterly program income reports, if applicable, and project completion reports. So you will miss points on this if you're missing the report itself, or if they're late. For example, one missing status report is a 5-point deduction, and this is per report, not overall for the full project. And a late report is a 2-point deduction for a maximum of 50 points. These points can be lost rather easily, so please do make a note of this. Next slide, please. Material misrepresentation. Any omission or misrepresentation made by an applicant that could jeopardize the department from funding a project or place the department at risk of a HUD monitoring finding shall have a 200-point deduction. Again, this would be applicable once you have had funds awarded. Next slide, please. Your prior performance. So again, only applicable if you've had an award, been awarded home funds. As we've discussed, all applications start with a 200 points in the prior performance category, and unless you have previously received a home award, this category will more than likely not be applicable to you. It is likely the full points may be awarded. Thank you. Next slide, please. Community need and project feasibility. Community need, we may award up to 250 points for any activity type based on the date is found in Appendix C in the Home NOFA webpage. And there is quite a bit of information there. So if you have some questions of that, we ask that you follow up with us. It's difficult for us to go through each of that right and one of our presentations, but we do have a slide that you may be able to, that we'll show you. Also, project feasibility. You will have a self-scoring in your application package for eCivas. Please complete the self-evaluation worksheet. Just the completing of that is worth 150 points. The remaining 50 points on this category is based on the highest percentage of home assisted units. And this is essentially how many homes are you building based on the percentage of the overall project. Okay, next slide, please. This is the Appendix C for rental new construction. Once you go on the link, you will find these. And again, it depends on the contract, on the project area, the county, and there is a score point awarded for each of that, which may or may not be applicable to your particular project site because you may be building a native trust land. This is for the rehab project, and we also have one for the first-time homebuyer. I'm sorry. So next slide, please. This is for the rehab project, and then if you have a rehab project, and then the next slide, please. And this is for the first-time homebuyers if you're building first-time homebuyer project. Next slide, please. Our project readiness project. These are the project development plan falls under our project readiness category. And there are points associated with each piece of document that you will be submitting as part of your project development plan. We've listed here, and I won't go through all of them, but this is for new construction. In this particular case, your market study is worth 35 points. So we do ask that you submit that, the property appraisal, phase 1 and 2, if required by phase 1, flood analysis, and so forth. And they are the points, the list of documents required and the points awarded to each document is slightly different for each category of project that you may be applying for. For example, the market study on a new construction project is worth 35 points versus it's only worth 10 points for a rehab project. Can we do next slide, please? And these are the list of the documentation that you will be asked to submit for a rehab project as part of your project development plan. Next slide, please. And we also have a list for you. And again, the category listed and the points awarded for each under your project development plan for the first-time homebuyers project. Please note that there's a difference in points, as I mentioned. Next slide, please. State objectives. For the state objective scoring, there are 3 sub-factors for which applicants can receive points up to the 200 points maximum. Applications are reviewed and rated. Points will be awarded for the following objectives. Committed financing. Essentially, do you have your permitted financing committed? Recovery assistance for natural disaster survivors, and policy objectives, which special needs populations, homelessness, or extremely low income objectives fall under the 3rd category. Next slide, please. The committed financing. You may receive up to 100 points if you have, when you submit your application, your permanent financing commitment, and points are awarded as 10 points increments based on each 10% of the project, the way it's worked. And there is a chart in the NOFA. So again, please do look at your NOFA. So also for projects anticipating for applying for any type of tax credit, this has changed. We typically did not consider full permanent financing committed, but in this NOFA, if you have 50% of the non-home permanent financing committed to the project by the application due date, and you intend to apply for tax credits, then the application will receive 50 points out of the possible 100. This is new this year. Before it was an all or nothing. Next slide, please. Recovery assistance disaster survivors. This is also a new state objective for ORNOFA. And this, please note that even though maybe some native land trusts were not declared in a disaster zone, the state of California, their national disaster declaration applies to the whole of the state. Any trust land which is located in any of the counties which were declared a national disaster area will be included. For example, Butte County was declared a national disaster area, so all tribes located within the Butte County boundaries would qualify for these points. Next slide, please. Okay, policy objectives. Its special needs population awarded to proposed rental projects with funding commitments that target special needs population using any of the listed funding sources. Please note that if you are submitting to another program that does service or that will be providing serve special needs population, the projects must include supportive services in accordance with the core components of Housing First under Welfare and Institutions Code 8255. This is an OR category, so please note either you are in a natural disaster area or you're working with special needs populations, or can you please send to the next slide, please? And my apologies. Natural disaster area, it's its own point category. This policy objectives is 3. You can qualify or be awarded the 70 points if you meet one of these 3 next criteria. Special needs, as I discussed. Also, homelessness. Points shall be awarded to applications that propose rental projects, primarily serving people experiencing homelessness or those at risk of homelessness. Next slide, please. Or you may be awarded the points if you are serving extremely low income. And by extremely low income populations, we mean those that are 30% of the median family income for the area, based on HUD's stated income levels. Okay, that is it for me. So if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat, and I'm taking you to a break.
How long a break are we going to do this afternoon?
Yeah, this is Francesca. So it's 1:55. It's a fairly small group, and we're moving along at a very good pace. I think we'll probably be done within an hour after returning from the break. So let's just take a quick 5-minute break, if that's okay for folks, because we are moving so quickly and there are just a few of us. So if we could be back at 2 o'clock, and then we'll turn it over to Chris to continue on through rating and ranking. Thank you, everybody. It is 2 o'clock. I'm hoping that everybody is getting back to our presentation. It looks like Chris is off of mute, so he's probably ready to proceed with continuing rating and ranking. And I'm going to ask, just because I'm feeling lonely here, if other people could turn their cameras on just so our audience could see those of us who are presenting. That would be great. And that said, Chris, if you want to go ahead and get started, that would be wonderful. Thank you, Nikki.
Great. Thank you so much, Francesca. So I just wanted to touch base on the previous section regarding capacity performance. So for that section, it will not apply to 99.99% of you, because I think we've only awarded home funds to one tribal entity in the past. So we placed these slides in this deck page for you just to show that if you are awarded home funds through this NOFA round, that you should try your best to adhere to the deadlines that we have set in your standard agreement and whatnot, and reporting deadlines, so that it does not affect your future applications when the prior performance category does kick in. So we just want to emphasize, please follow the dates for any reports that are required from us that are due, so that you can maintain your full points. Now, that being said, with the community need, there's not enough tribal data out there for the different counties and the cities or whatnot. So most likely you will receive full points for the community need, which is 250 points. So we just placed those slides in there just to show that there's differences between rental new construction, rehabilitation, and first-time home buyer. But since this is tribally focused, it does not it may not apply to your situation at this time. So most likely you will get those full points for the community need section. So that being said, I'm going to start with my section, rating and ranking for the information and documentation. Next slide, please. So this is very important. Please make sure that you also read the home supplement document. This document is a separate document from the NOFA, and it will be available to you in the eCivis portal when it's open on February 12th. It's a document that you should read hand in hand with the NOFA, because it contains additional information and additional HCD forms that you need to complete in order to make your application fully complete before you submit it to us through the eCivis portal. So make sure you start with the home supplement document. There's five categories for scoring, and which include the project development plan, which is PDP for short, the zoning, your local government approvals, design progress, and your permanent finance. Next slide, please. Now, your PDP plan, your points are awarded if it's included with your application. It has to be recent. For example, your appraisal and your market study must be prepared in 2023. We cannot accept older appraisals like that were done 3 or 4 years ago. So it must meet the basic requirements using the correct standard, and it must be prepared by a qualified entity, and that goes for rental new construction and your rehab projects. Next slide, please. Your PDP items. So there's the market study, the appraisal, your phase 1, phase 2, and VES. Now, your phase 2 is only required if your phase 1 asks for it, and that's for rental new construction. In addition, you have your construction cost estimate, your floodplain analysis, your relocation, and then for rehab, we have your lead-based paint report, your asbestos report, your mold report, your scope of work and cost estimate for the rehab, and your physical needs assessment, P&A for short. In addition, we have relocation as well. Next slide, please. Now, your market study must be prepared in 2023. It must meet the 2021 TCAC market study guidelines. Now, the funny thing about this is that if you search for the 2021 market study guidelines in the TCAC website, it'll have a link for 2021. But if you click on that link, it will show a report, or it'll point towards a report that says the 2019 and 2020 joint market study guidelines. So that is the current information we have at this moment. Those links could change, but as of right now, the 2021 market study guideline link is pointing to a 2019 and 2020 joint guideline. So make sure that your market study is at least prepared based on those guidelines. Next slide, please. Your appraisal, prepared no earlier than 2023. It's required for all acquisitions, but it's not required if the land is donated. There's no land cost in your development budget and not a capital contribution. Value of the capital contribution must be supported by appraisal. Next slide, please. For new construction, your phase 1 and VES must be prepared no earlier than 2022. So you have an extra year for this one. And it must be to the newest standard, which is the E1527-21. Your phase 2, only if your phase 1 requires it, must be prepared also no earlier than 2022. And the new standard for this, the latest standard, is the E1903-19. Next study. All right, next slide, please. Your floodplain analysis. There is a FEMA flood hazard determination form OMB number 1660-0040 or later. Must be prepared in 2023. Must be prepared by flood certification service or other qualified third party, and it's required for all flood. The flood cert is required on all projects, and it must be current because floodplains do change. So make sure that it is current. Next slide, please. Your floodplain analysis. Now, if any portion of the site is in a floodplain, we must demonstrate that the floodplain is incidental to the project. For example, the FEMA flood hazard determination form that it indicates no buildings in the floodplain, and that recorded covenants or restrictions are required. You have to obtain a FEMA conditional letter of map revision, which is included in your application, which must be included in your application. Or if you intend to obtain a conditional letter of map revision, it must have a narrative or explanation of the intent, and it must be it's required prior to loan closing. Next slide, please. Now, building in the floodplain, it's found by HUD, but it's not impossible. If it is in a floodplain, we do ask that you go through an 8-step process. We did not list all the 8 steps here, but a few of the steps include analysis of alternate sites considered and rejected, analyze positive and negative impacts of the buildings, describe mitigation measures to minimize negative impacts, and supporting documentation. And it applies to rehab projects. Now, again, floodplain analysis, because depending on your situation, the tribe may have been relocated to an area that is considered high risk or in a flood zone, and that was not to your intention. We do ask that you still complete the process, and we will review accordingly, because we just want to make sure that we do our due diligence to make sure the proper procedures were followed, and we we understand that this could be a barrier, but we just want to, we don't want to prohibit anyone from building anywhere, but we just want to make sure procedures are followed, and we will review accordingly. So just if anything, reach out to us and we can see what we can do to not make it a barrier for you. Next slide, please. For your new construction, we're going to ask for a preliminary cost estimate. This form is located within the home supplement, and it must be prepared in 2023, uploaded into the eCivis portal, and it must be consistent with your development budget or an explanation to show if there's any differences. And the preparer or signer, the architect doesn't have to sign it. It could be your general contractor could sign it. Next slide, please. For your rehab project, your detailed scope of work. It's prepared no more than 6 months prior to an application due date listed in NOFA. Project must meet local codes and rehab standards. It must be consistent with P&A identified immediate needs. Includes work identified in the P&A as needed. First 5 years of the project, and it must use the same cost estimate for the rental new construction projects. Next slide, please. Your physical needs assessment. Again, this is for rehab projects only. It's prepared again no earlier than 2023. So you see the theme here. We want current reports here. Only oldie moldy reports that we're asking would be your phase 1, phase 2, which are 2022, but everything else is going to be 2023 going forward. Prepared no earlier than 2023. You have your Fannie Mae guidelines. There's a HUD to market program. That is an actual link in the deck page. Meet additional home requirements, and it's for USDA RD projects, and the USDA RD capital needs assessment is acceptable. And they must appropriately licensed architect or engineer in business of performing P&As. Next slide, please. Your lead, asbestos, and mold reports, again, prepared no earlier than 2023. Make sure this is only for your rehab projects by a properly certified accredited preparer. And in order to earn all your points, all 3 reports have to be submitted. Next slide. Now, if your project was built prior to January 1, 1978, of course, they've used lead-based paint back in the day. So we're going to require that a report be completed. They must be prepared by a certified lead-based paint inspector assessor, and the mitigation must demonstrate compliance with the home rehabilitation standards. Next slide. Your asbestos report requires analysis for the environmental laboratory accredited by the National Institute of Standards and Technology Asbestos. Next slide. Your mold report. It's based on a thorough building inspection, and they may test hidden areas if needed. And of course, it must be prepared by a third party having sufficient qualifications and expertise to competently prepare the report. Next slide, please. Now, your relocation and general information notice, or GIN, and your relocation plan. So we want 1 copy of your actual GIN, your tenant notification list, proof of delivery, and your relocation plan. Again, prepared and updated in 2023. And that is if relocation does apply to you. Your zoning, local approvals, and fees. Now, there's 3 forms in eCivis. These are HCD forms, and these 3 forms are verification of zoning of the local approvals, verification of local development impact fees, and verification of water and sewer availability. Now, we ask that the tribal community fill out these forms completely. If there's an item that does not apply to them and they mark it as NA, we still require an explanation as to why it is not applicable to your situation. We cannot have you mark it as NA and just leave it blank, because that means you'll be losing points on that. So in order to gain the most points, fill out the forms as complete as you can. If it doesn't apply to you, please provide an explanation as to why it does not, and then submit it as is. And it must be signed by your developer or local official that applies to your tribe. Zoning, local approvals and fees, your points awarded. The tribes are entitled to all these points as long as the forms are filled out completely. And of course, we will review and make sure that everything is reviewed thoroughly and it's fair all around. But if it's properly zoned, 40 points. All local approvals obtain 80 points, and both water and sewer are available to the project, 5 points. And then for the rehab, all local approvals obtained is just 1 point. Your design progress must be executed, an executed agreement with an architectural firm, a letter from the architect or construction specialist stating status of plans and specifications, such as you're ready to submit to planning department, your preliminary plans and specifications, and your conceptual, which is your elevation and your floor plans. Now your permanent financing. So points will be awarded on a sliding scale basis based on the percentage of your committed perm financing as evidenced by enforceable commitment letters. So for your rental new construction, if less than 10% of your perm financing is committed, you get 0 points. Now, if 50 to 100% of your perm financing is committed, you get 25 points. For rental rehab, it's a little bit different. It's 35 points for 50 to 100% and 20 points for a 20 to 49.99%. So depending on what project you're doing, the points will be allocated accordingly. So again, to reiterate, max points for your percent of non-home financing committed, 25 points and 35 for rehab. Your permanent financing must have enforceable commitment, no conditions or qualifiers other than standard conditions, must include the borrower's name, project name, address, or legal description, and must state the loan terms. That's very important. It must state the loan terms of the actual commitment letter. So at this time, I want to bring it back around and introduce my fellow home representative, Francesca Wander, and she will take you through the journey of the project feasibility, financial feasibility.
Thank you, Chris. And nice to be back again. I've missed you all. And I'm here, as Chris said, to talk about project feasibility. And we will be starting off with financial feasibility. Next slide, please. Project feasibility. So the universal application, which is commonly referred to the UA, is based on the most current 2023, actually, because I don't believe 2024 is out yet, home loan and rent limits, which are accessible through the HCD website as well as incorporated into the UA. The mini UA has been modified for upload into eCivus, where you will also have access to the home supplement of the current NOFA. In addition to the NOFA and the supplement, both of which are extremely important for you to become extremely familiar with, all your applications must also comply with HCD's UMRs, or Uniform Multifamily Regulations, as well as a variety of state and federal regulations, which we'll address later. Next slide, please. On to determining the maximum loan limit for which you can apply, we use a technique called subsidy layering analysis. The maximum home funds allowed for any project is the lowest amount that is determined by performing the following 3 tests up to the current maximum NOFA limit of $12 million. The first test that you would apply is the ratio test. The ratio of home funds that you request to the total eligible development costs of the project may not exceed the ratio of home units to the total number of units in the project. Otherwise, home would be subsidizing non-assisted units, and you would have to scale back your award accordingly. The second test is the home subsidy per home assisted unit test, which states that the amount of home funds requested cannot exceed the total of the home assisted units times their respective per unit subsidy limit for the current year, also available on the HCD website. The third test that must be met is the cost allocation method, which essentially states that the amount of home funds requested cannot exceed the ratio of home square footage to total square footage in the project times total development costs. Otherwise, home would be subsidizing construction costs of non-home assisted units, and your award would have to be scaled back accordingly. Next slide. I'm not going to read this long list. It is simply a list of all of the tabs on your mini UA that you will want to complete from left to right, every single one of them, in completing your application prior to uploading to eCivics. Next slide. Please be aware that the UA worksheets are linked, which is why you do want to complete those pages in order from left to right. Please do not overwrite any formulas and do not enter any information in the white cells. In fact, those cells are locked. The only cells you should be entering data to are the cells that are in yellow. And then, of course, again, that UA or mini UA must be uploaded via the eCivis portal. Next slide, please. The UA rents and units mix tab. On that tab, you will want to enter the number of units and their AMI limits. You'll also want to enter, among other things, the proposed rent if it is different from the maximum rent allowed. You'll want to enter rent for your manager's unit or units only if you're actually charging rent for those units. And very importantly, you want to make sure that you enter all subsidy information, if any, on that tab as well. Next slide, please. This is simply a pictorial representation of that worksheet, the max fund and unit mix tab. So again, it's very important that you complete all sections in yellow as completely, accurately, and thoroughly as you possibly can. Next slide, please. Subsidies. We mentioned including subsidy information on the previous slide. Project-based rental subsidies only will be included on the max fund and unit mix tab, where you will be entering the subsidy name and the monthly rent subsidy amount. Tenant-based rental subsidies are not allowed and should not be included. We don't utilize them in determining project feasibility. So please do not include any tenant-based rental subsidies on the max funds and unit tab. Just project-based or PBV vouchers only. Next slide. Onto development sources. Please make sure that all columns for each development source is complete and that the data and the calculations are consistent and correct across the form. Paying particular attention to such items as interest rate, required payment, term, etc., because all of this information, as we mentioned earlier, because the pages are connected and linked, will flow through to other areas of the UA. In regard to your home loan terms specifically, that loan is, in the case of Native American applications, 50 years at 3% deferred interest with residual receipts. Next slide, please. Limitations on senior debt. Balloon payments and sandwich loans must comply with the 2017 UMR section 8310 and 8315. A balloon payment, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. A sandwich loan situation exists when the investor and the senior lender are related. In either of these cases, in addition to a regulatory agreement, you will be required to execute a senior regulatory agreement, also known as a bifurcated regulatory agreement, when there is a balloon payment or sandwich loan. Interest rate resets as well must have a cap, and the project must remain feasible, i.e. cash flow positive for 20 years at the cap rate upon reset. Next slide, please. More on the development budget. These are some items that are oftentimes overlooked. Again, as with all of the tabs, you want to complete these items as completely and accurately as you possibly can. It doesn't help to either overestimate or underestimate costs or leave costs out that would affect your budget. So some typical line items that are oftentimes omitted are environmental remediation. So if your phase 1 calls for remediation, you want to make sure that you budget for that in your development budget. Same thing goes for relocation. If there are relocation costs involved, make sure that you plan for those in your development budget. If there are other line items that are not specifically named, but it says other, please specify, well then please specify. So all of your development budget line items have a place to specify what your other lines might be. And there are also comment areas on each line item that give you the ability to expand upon what that line item cost might be. The more information that you provide for us, the better, the better off for everybody. The other thing that oftentimes gets overlooked are things such as contractor overhead, profit and general requirements. The total of these items cannot exceed 14% of total construction costs as defined by TCAC. Next slide, please. More on the development budget. You also want to make sure that you include construction contingencies. There are minimum amounts required for construction contingencies. These projects oftentimes take 2 or more years to build, during which time costs can vary widely from the time that you apply to the time you actually complete the project. So you want to have built-in contingencies to cover cost overruns. So for new construction projects, you want to plan for a minimum of 5% of total construction costs for this contingency. And for rental rehab and conversion projects, you want to provide for a minimum of 10% of total construction costs for this contingency. Next slide, please. If there's any commercial space in the project, which is admittedly rare, you want to enter the cost attribute for the commercial space on each line in the commercial column and provide detailed methodology for allocation of those costs. Bearing in mind that home only pays for home, residential and other home-related space, not for commercial space. Next slide, please. In regards to replacement reserves, which are required on all projects. Replacement reserves may not be capitalized on the development budget unless required and documented by a funding source. The replacement reserves, like your operating reserves, should be included in the operating budget, not in the development budget. So make sure you get that line item in the right place on your UA. Next slide, please. There have been changes to our transition reserve requirements for new construction and rehab projects. Transition reserves are required for projects utilizing project-based vouchers to maintain positive cash flow through year 20 while preventing tenant displacement in the event of termination of rent subsidies. Rather than maintaining its own transition reserve, however, the borrower may now choose to participate in the newly established pooled transition reserve per HCD's amended transition reserve policy. So this is an improvement over last NOFA when you were having to set aside a 15% of a year or two of subsidy income in transition reserves. That was a much larger number than the way the calculated contribution to the pooled transition reserve is being calculated currently. So that is another bit of good news in the new NOFA. However, bear in mind that, as always, home funds cannot be used to capitalize that reserve. Next slide, please. You must always use the lesser of land cost or value in your development budget, which should be between between unrelated parties. Any sales price and any amount over the appraised value cannot be paid with home funds. It's certainly allowed, but that difference must be paid with other funding sources other than home. Reasonable verifiable carrying costs are, however, allowed for reimbursement. And you must explain calculation of costs in the applicant comment section. Next slide, please. And this is a partial pictorial representation of the development budget. Next slide, please. Moving on to the operating budget, we mentioned replacement reserves being an operating budget item, not a capitalized development budget item. Replacement reserves must be calculated on new construction at the lesser of 0.6% of estimated construction costs or $500 per unit. It's the $500 per unit that is almost always the lesser amount, and that is what we most commonly see on our applications. And with rehabilitation as well, the deposits shall be consistent with the long-term needs identified in the physical needs assessment, the PNA, or $500 per unit. Next slide, please. More on operating budget. Financial expenses that are recurring. Make sure to include all mandatory debt service as you have detailed on the Development Sources tab. Please also include all annual monitoring fees for any other applicable HCD programs, such as, for instance, MHP, NPLH, JOCERNA, etc., which is usually 0.42% of the respective loan amounts. And make sure to include all bond services fees as well under financial expenses. Next slide, please. Monitoring fees, which you will see referenced in the NOFA, do not pertain to Native American entity projects. So you do not need to include this on your operating budget. It does not apply. Next slide, please. Cash flow analysis. I mentioned a project having to demonstrate positive cash flow for 20 years. Other HCD programs that are state funded are for 15, but home being federally funded has a 20-year cash flow horizon. Please, on the cash flow worksheet on the mini UA, do not change trending formulas. Those are governed by regulation, guidelines, etc. We will always look to see that your first year debt service coverage ratio, or DSCR, is between 1.1 and 1.2. That is not to say that it won't sometimes be less than that or more than that, particularly in the case of small projects, but that is the target that we are going to be looking for. If it exceeds 1.2, your cash flow must not be more than 12% of your operating expenses. If it is more than 12% of operating expenses, that indicates to us that the project is throwing off too much cash. And since the objective is to provide affordable housing, not produce a profit, that might indicate that the project is throwing off too much cash and the award might need to be scaled back a bit accordingly. And I already mentioned that cash flow must be positive for 20 years. Next slide, please. Moving on to NEPA, environmental review. Some of this was mentioned earlier, but it really bears repeating. NEPA, first of all, NEPA is triggered upon application for federal funds. We refer to that as contemplation of federal funds, which essentially means submitting an application. So once you submit that application through the eCivis portal, that triggers NEPA. Once NEPA is triggered, you want to be very conscious of not committing any choice limiting actions, sometimes referred to as CLA, per 24 CFR, Part 58, Section 5822. So upon completion of or application for federal funds, there is a prohibition against any activity that would have an adverse effect, that could have an adverse effect on the environment, or that could possibly limit the choices of reasonable alternatives. So for instance, you certainly don't want to begin any work on the site after application prior to the conclusion of your NEPA review and your receipt of your AUGF, because doing so could limit the choice of reasonable activities if it turns out that your site does not qualify for an AUGF. Next slide, please. So a little bit more on this. From the date that you apply until the date that you receive your authority to use grant funds, or AUGF, all activity involving the project and the site must stop. This limitation applies to a broad range of both buyer and seller activities, as well as to the land itself. So it's very, very important before undertaking any activity, or if you have any questions at all, you want to send an email to the Home NOFA inbox to make sure that what you are thinking about doing doesn't create a choice limiting action. And then finally, next slide, just some final warnings. Make sure that you allow yourself sufficient time to complete the process. Mitigation may be required, and we referenced the fact that those costs would have to be included in the development budget, but you want to leave enough time to not just complete the process, but allow for any mitigation that might be needed to be undertaken. And again, a reminder that actions taken by buyer or seller can trigger those choice limiting actions. One example might be you want to make sure that you provide sufficient extensions in your purchase contract between the buyer and the seller to accommodate the entire NEPA process, which can be very, very lengthy. A contract, should it expire during that time frame, can be extended, but only as long as the current contractor option has not yet expired. If that contract expires and then you extend it, that is a choice limiting action. So be very, very careful about not doing that. Next slide, relocation. Now we're just going to jump on to the next slide. Please make sure you're familiar with the Uniform Relocation Act and Section 104D of the HCD Act of 1974 to prevent displacement of individuals or business concerns without providing adequate notice and compensation. If relocation is necessary, you must establish and document in your application a date of initiation of negotiation, or ION, and make sure to include the cost of relocation in your development budget. Next slide. More specifically, if relocation is triggered, you want to make sure to include with your application a copy of the GIN, or General Information Notice, that was provided to all occupants at or prior to your application, along with a complete tenant notification list, along with proof of delivery to each of those tenants, as well as a complete relocation plan, including costs of relocation. All those 4 items, as Chris mentioned earlier, must be provided with your application. If relocation is not applicable, then your application must clearly document via a statement why it is not applicable. And we would also review other documents provided, such as your appraisal, your market study, your phase 1, to corroborate the fact that relocation is not required for the project. Next slide. I mentioned earlier that in addition to the NOVA, in addition to the supplement, there are HCD regulations and state regulations, as well as federal regulations that you should be aware of because they may apply. So to give you just some examples, labor standards such as Davis-Bacon prevailing wages, which applies to projects with 12 or more home units or tribally determined wages, as well as Section 3. Procurement standards pertaining to the RFP process for selecting an admin subcontractor, which we highly recommend, per 2 CFR Part 200, or tribal procurement policies if they are at least as or more restrictive than homes. EEOC regulations pertaining to such things as affirmative marketing, affirmative fair housing, which does apply to projects in Indian country that are on fee land, as well as the active solicitation of maybe-weeby subcontractors, which means minority-based and women-based businesses, as well as other various regulations such as Violence Against Women Act, aka VAWA, and other similar pieces of legislation. With that, I am going to turn it over to our guest star, our section chief, who was unable to join us due to an emergency at the beginning of our presentation, but I would love to turn it over to her to just say a few closing words to everyone on the call. And you're muted, Nikki.
Okay, how about now? There, my little box is shining. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so sorry. It's been one of those harrowing afternoons where I had to leave behind my vehicle. I did not have my cell phone with me because I was just rushing. It was only going to be 15 minutes. And my car broke down in a very, very nice bystander let me give them cash, and they ordered me an Uber. So that's how I got home. But anyway, I wanted to welcome everybody. I hope you enjoyed our presentation. A couple things that I wanted to go back over is for especially for our tribal applicants, we know that this is a lot of information. A lot of it is new and strange. And so we're strongly encouraging you all to reach out to us and talk to us about the specific projects you want to plan, so we can help guide you through not only what you'll need to get your project off the ground, but to get an application submitted and awarded through the home program. This is not an easy program. There's lots of things that we struggle with every day, just being a regular, just serving our normal developers that are very, very savvy. And then when we add on the complexities and layering that come with tribal trust land and the differences in some of the requirements as we navigate those, we ask that you be patient with us as we try to find the most equitable and reasonable solution that we can within our powers and the restrictions that some of our federal and state regulations impose on us. And with that said, please use this NOFA email to contact us and request technical assistance sessions. I will be present in those sessions to kind of help my team. You've met my project team. They're on this call to help them navigate how to best assist you as we move forward and continue to engage with our tribes in hopes that we can help you better provide the affordable, sustainable housing that you need for your community. Is there any other slides to this deck? I don't know if this is the last one, but I want to say thank you. Thank you for taking the time to attend. Thank you to our tribal partners who are also with us on this call and for their time out of their day to help us not only develop this PowerPoint and try and customize it as best we can for our tribal partners, but also so that that you know that you're not in this alone, that you can reach out to me, you can reach out to our tribal partners, Zachary or Mary, and we will all work together to help make this home program a success for the projects you want to bring our way. Once again, thank you very much for attending. We really appreciate everything you do. I think there's a little survey at the end of this that we would like you to complete about the process and about the workshop. I didn't see any questions. In the chat, if you would like, we can open up microphones and have a little question and answer session. It's really up to what you guys want to do, but know that our door is always open and you can reach us at the end of an email address. Mary, do you want to say a few words?
Just thank you all for attending. I think that this is great. And thank you to the program team for putting together this presentation. Excited to continue working with you all.
Yes, your feedback and comments only help us make this better each time we do it. So please don't be shy and fill out those evaluation forms. And just know that we don't take anything personally. Our goal is to make things better. And we can't make things better if we don't know what's broken. So please help us get better. With that, we can end this session.
Thank you, everyone.